Hello, DBT community. We are coming to you live from our offices, bedrooms, living rooms, and even one camper van. My name is Anna. I have the great privilege of leading the team of lovely humans working on community here at DBT Labs. And I am joined by Tristan Handy, the founder and CEO of DBT Labs, of course, and Drew Banin, our co-founder and chief product officer. Hi, Tristan and Drew. Thanks for joining us. And of course, we're all here today because we dropped a ton of big news. There's a Series C, there's a new name, and all of that happened last week. So I'm sure folks have lots of questions, and Tristan and Drew wanted to be here for you to answer them. The format of this conversation is going to be super unstructured. We want to create as much space as possible for you, the community, to ask us questions. And if you're not already in Events AMA, that's the Events-AMA channel, please go ahead and head over there and drop in your questions, and we'll try to get through as many of them as we can. What we will do is we'll grab your questions from Slack and I will read them out. Also, please let us know if you have questions that are specifically aimed at Drew, Tristan, or there for either. Of course, we're not just here today because of all of the exciting announcements from last week, but we're also here because DBT just turned 5. So in that spirit, I thought that we could do a little bit of a rewind to the early days. And I forgot to show you our faces. So here they are. Happy 5th birthday, DBT. Drew had put together the slide of DBT the early days. And do you want to say a few words?
Yeah, I'd love to. Thanks, Anna. These are some of the favorites from my photo roll. I guess going clockwise around the top, we've got Jeremy, our PM for DBT Core, modeling a DBT shirt. I think this was a meetup at Grove Collaborative in San Francisco that we went to. That was a lot of fun. To the right of him, I think this is maybe our first meetup ever. It was at Casper's headquarters in NYC. And if I'm not mistaken, it's Brian Kickstarter, as we know him in Slack, talking about using DBT for machine learning. So bottom here's, this is DBT Learn being led by Erica Louie and our team, now our head of data. And this was a lot of fun. I think this was the first real DBT Learn that I went to, and it was really great. I still keep in touch with a lot of the folks that we met on this trip. And bottom left, this was one of our first.
Drew, where is that one?
This was at the Periscope headquarters, bottom right.
Oh, yeah. Got it. I couldn't place that one. We did one in Philly that was like, it was like 15 people or something. Yeah, okay, cool.
I think this might have been the second one.
Yeah.
But that was a fun trip. I have a lot of good photos that didn't make this page. One of them is Jeremy and I eating a burrito in the mission and after this DBT Learn. So I'll share that in the Slack maybe. Actually, I have a lot of pictures of Jeremy on my phone to share. Bottom left, yes. Classic. This was our holiday in the summer. We were at Six Flags riding the roller coasters. And we all wore like Hawaiian shirts, except I don't own any Hawaiian shirts. I think I have, if I'm not mistaken, my shirt says Seinfeld, no soup for you silhouette.
And the day almost soured when Claire misplaced her wallet briefly, and then we found it, and the day continued, and it was amazing.
That's amazing. I am so thrilled to see these awesome memories. I'm sure there are many more. Please put as many pictures of Jeremy as possible into the Slack. I think he will really love it.
Oh my gosh, I just saw Chris Lawless's message. I really completely forgot that happened. Literally the Six Flags that we were at, the power went out in the entire park. There were people that were stuck at the top of a roller coaster. It was a bit of a mess. We were on the ground, so we were okay, but it's not a great situation for a little bit there.
You do not want to be stuck at the top of a roller coaster. That is absolutely true. Oh my God.
Sorry.
All right. So with that, let's jump into actual AMA time. And I have a couple of questions to get us started. Joel would like to know, Tristan, how you find time to write a newsletter once a week and now also record a podcast.
Yeah, that's a good question. There's a certain amount of, maybe there's two parts to that answer. One is that my wife is very supportive of the company, and she, was involved in the decision to start it in the first place. And so she's forgiving if it takes some time outside of work hours. In general, though, I really do try to do it during work hours. And really, my job's super fascinating these days because we've started to get big enough where we have a real leadership team that knows what the hell they're doing better than I do. And so a lot of times I'm actually able to focus on these types of things, whereas other more qualified humans are doing the day-to-day running of the business.
Amazing. I have one more softball for Drew before we get into the really spicy questions. Drew, tell us about the first time you met Tristan. What was your first impression?
Oh my goodness. I was an intern in college working with a company in Philly called RJ Metrics, and I was on the engineering team. And I think I was actually supposed to be working with Connor's engineering team, our CTO, Connor. And on day like 4 of my internship, I had no idea what I was doing. And Tristan, here's how I remembered it, grabbed me by my collar and pulled me into the marketing office and said, Drew, you're doing marketing operations now.
That's not fair. That's not fair.
It's not fair. It's really not fair. But that's how I remember it. I remember just so distinctly Tristan teaching me how to write SQL. I was learning my SQL for the first time. And I ran these queries and they just like never finished. And I was like, Tristan, I think the database is broken. And he was like, no, I think you don't know how to write SQL. And we like still have those same conversations to this day.
Amazing. What I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that you can see everyone's faces much bigger. But please continue to chat in events and throw in your questions. And let's get to some of the meat. Or if you're vegan, let's start with a question from Torsten. This one might be for Drew as well. What are the top 3 new DBT core features you will use your $150 million on?
Yeah, so we're gonna split it up 3 ways, $50 million per GitHub ticket. Just kidding. So there's a lot that you can do with $150 million. But when I think about on the longer term timeline, there's a bunch of different pieces of DBT that we're really excited to invest more deeply in. So I'm thinking a lot about the mechanics of how DBT operates as a compiler. And we've had this long running arc of performance, and there's a DBT server that interfaces with all of it. So getting all the sort of interfaces right there and this kind of architecture of DBT core that we can keep building on top of remains a really high priority for us. I think about, really, we have a big list of 1.0 work to do through the end of the year. And that's going to be another kind of stream of improvements we want to make. But beyond that, we're really thinking about, now that we have these foundations of DBT, what can we build on top of it? And so this kind of harks back to the talk that I gave at Coalesce. We think a lot about data quality and kind of data discovery, data observability, things like that. And so really thinking about how we can both build the platform of DBT and also address these concrete use cases on top of it, I think is really interesting. Just historically, I guess to be very concrete, there are parts of DBT that I'm still the maintainer of today. So like the hub site, hub.getdbt.com, cannot wait to have a team focused on that particular website. And certainly there's a lot more to do as well.
Amazing. Tristan, there's a couple of questions in the same vein from Michael and from Protect, so I'm going to try and paraphrase them. What are some of the biggest challenges for DBT Labs in the coming 5 years? What are the things that make you nervous or worried?
Okay, yeah, those are two different questions, and I'll say why they're 2 different questions. One is like, what makes me nervous and worried? The answer is that nothing makes me nervous and worried, and it's not because that there's nothing hard that we have to do. There's so much that we have to do that's hard, and we may very well fail and flame out, and you'll all look back on this moment and laugh at me. But it's more that my original goal was so much smaller than what we've achieved in the world and the impact that we've been able to have. And like everything from here on out is gravy for me. It's an absolute joy to be able to do this. And so I sleep really well at night and just am trying to do what we can do from here on out. What are the biggest challenges? That's not what I just said. That was not actually your intention of the question. Biggest challenges. I think 2 things. One is what I wrote about in the blog post where I was trying to, Snowflake had an interesting situation where Snowflake was directly competitive with Amazon Redshift, but they were 100% dependent at the beginning on AWS to actually like toast their infrastructure. And so you have this like funny relationship between AWS and Snowflake in the early days before Snowflake went to like multi-cloud. And we are anticipating that there's going to be that type of dynamic that starts to exist in our space too, where there's just so much prior art that the major cloud providers love taking popular open source software and hosting versions of it. And that will be a thing that we will have to navigate, much as every single other Apache 2 licensed open source maintainer has had to navigate. But that's a high class problem to have. I'd much rather have that problem than the problem that like no one gives a shit about what we're doing. And so then the other one, let me see if I can, what was the other one? Oh, there's so much opportunity in the space that we're in. I alluded to this in my Slack message, like maybe everybody else is excited about the future of this industry too. There's just a lot of movement and it's a fun time to be a part of it. And we have like more things we want to do. And so we've been working almost exclusively for the entire 5 years that we've been doing this thing on a data transformation product. And sure, there's some stuff around the edges that DBT does too, but it's a data transformation product. And we have aspirations to do some things in adjacent spaces. Drew and I have both talked about metadata and data cataloging before, and we have things that we are now like in progress on there. But it's really hard to transition the same muscles by which like Drew and I sat around inventing something from scratch in 2016, where it was literally like we would have big picture conversations on my couch into the context of like a real operating business and try to like create that same type of magic. And so we're involved right now in figuring out exactly how to do that. Drew,
I think this is.
No, you have nothing to add on there?
It's such a good point. And you and I are talking about how we get more time on a couch together to spark a lot of those thoughts. But it really, the process of building a company that can do that like repeatedly is super critical. And we've grown so much in the past 18 months. I think that's one of the things that's easy to overlook as you're just inundated by very clear problems to solve. But if we're not constantly thinking out about the state of the art and what we want the future to look like, we're 30 seconds ahead on this stream, but we're going to find ourselves like 12 or 18 months behind by the time these problems are really manifesting out in the world. So I want to keep feeling like we're 18 months ahead of the industry for as long as we can.
I love that. That's a good segue to some of the questions we have on specifically product strategy. So I'm going to try and jump into a few of them, and feel free to both jump in when you have something you want to share. Andrew wants to know what tangential areas DBT is exploring to get into the future, if there's any you can share, or is ETL such a huge space? Or rather ELT.
Oh, geez, who wants to start with it? Let me just say that a thing, like a meta thing, and then you answer the actual question about what we want to do. I have the distinct pleasure or the distinct responsibility of talking to a lot of investors, and there's a lot of excitement in our space in terms of traditionally, this would have been called data integration. And it was like data integration, essentially go to the Informatica product catalog, and it was all that stuff. And now that's being completely unbundled, and there's ingestion and transformation and cataloging, discovery, there's observability, there's just like a million different things. And what's interesting is that those categories, those individual like smaller categories had not fully coalesced yet. It's not clear that the right answer is to have a quote unquote modern data stack with 10 layers to it. And it's, oh, you want a data stack? Buy 10 products. And if you don't want 10 or more products, then are there parts of these that get bundled together? So this is like a thing that like the entire industry is trying to solve right now. So we certainly have our own takes on this stuff, but I just wanted to like start by saying that this is the question. Everybody's trying to figure out the answer to this question right now. So Drew, answer it, please.
Yeah, happy to. It's really good framing. I can just tell you from a product strategy point of view, Tristan, do you remember in the early days of DBT, we talked about the Cambrian explosion of data tooling that came about, and things got quiet.
Do you mean like last year? I wrote that post last year. Has it been a long year, Drew?
Okay, that actually upsets me to hear. I thought it was longer ago than that. But I don't know, I feel like there was a whole lot of movement in the broader like modern data stack space in 2016, 2017. And we're trying to figure out like how do these things fit together? And then things got quiet. There was a little bit of consolidation that happened as a lot of the startups got acquired. Things fell more neatly into their places. But then I feel like things are starting to open back up again. And one of the ways I realize this is I do my session for all new hires at the company called What is DBT? And I would have 4 columns, and it was data loaders, data sources, data loaders, data warehouses and BI tools, and I'd motivate the existence of DBT. But now when we name tools, it's which column does it really go into? Like, where does census or high touch fit in? And is this really a data loader or is it something else?
Having to add on columns.
You just got to keep adding them. Yeah. And I think that's overall a good thing, but you're right. The logical endpoint is your data stack's going to have 10, 15, 20 tools in it. And I guess I can say from a product strategy point of view, the two problems or opportunities that it motivates are understanding what data exists and its provenance and how it's used. And the flip side of that, which is when something breaks, what's going to be impacted. So if your data loading process breaks, show me the lineage all the way out to the dashboards that are going to be in a bad state or stale or whatever it is. Or if census is broken, like what does that mean for your operations team or whatever, it's people using Salesforce. So when I think about the adjacencies, I really think about the way the market's changing, our goals for the product, and in terms of, say, transformation, let's just say, and the types of problems that it motivates that we can also solve based on all the context information that kind of DBT provides about what's happening in your data warehouse, where it came from, if the data is of high quality or things like that.
Can I say one more thing? There's so, thank you. There's so many different places that one could imagine like building something cool and new and useful. And when I think about which ones of those we should spend our still limited time and energy on, I get most excited about the problems wherein openness should exist. I think that DBT was, sure, 5 years ago, DBT was a reasonable idea, but what actually was the most different about it is that we decided we wanted to build it in an Apache 2 licensed way. And that allowed an entire industry to coalesce around a single solution, around a single community, around a skill set that you could take from job to job. There's like network effects involved in that. And there's those same characteristics don't happen if you just make a proprietary product. And I'm looking at the ecosystem and saying, where is something that like historically has been closed, but if it were made open, you could have these same types of network effects or flywheels.
I love that. We actually have a question related to that on transparency. Josh wanted to know, he says, previously there's been talk of opening up the roadmap for DBT Cloud a little. Does the threat of large competitors mean that this will be more tightly held?
I don't think so. I think that there's a really beautiful thing that happens with DBT core, having all of our issues be public and letting people comment upon them and help inform the thing that we build. And I can just tell you, as we grow the product and engineering team here, one of the things that we want to make sure to do a really good job of is bring like the voice of the community into the room when we're talking about the things we want to build and why we want to build them and how they should work. So I actually view it as the exact opposite. I think that if we're not able to do a good job of pulling the community into our future plans, the things we want to build, then it's going to be tough for us to build the right things. So maybe just like one or two secrets that might never see the light of day. But for the most part, the big things on the roadmap, we want to put them out in the world and get feedback on them for sure.
I recently described the act of building a community first company as a like continual trust fall. And like it has felt uncomfortable from day one as somebody who's never like been in a company like this before, but we just keep leaning in harder. I think you should expect us to continue doing that with the DBT Cloud roadmap too.
Love that. Speaking of trust fall, we have a couple of questions that came in anonymously, and I want to make sure we have time to jump to those. So I'm going to pick off a few. Obviously, no names from folks who submitted, but here's one. Well done for the Series C. Could you please elaborate on the $1.5 billion valuation? With all respect, the current DBT Cloud offering has a fairly low price point, so it's difficult to see how that would justify the valuation. DBT and the community are amazing, but how can this be monetized? Strategic cloud provider agnostic positioning, where you get to influence the future of analytics? Question mark.
That was 3 separate questions?
That was one question.
That was one question?
Yeah,
oh.
So.
Drew, do you want to talk about that or do you want me? Maybe can we talk about here, I'll say this and then you go deeper. And I can't share a ton of details around this, but we just signed our first $1 million plus customer. And yeah, it was like actually like incredibly exciting and big deal for us as an organization. So there's this funny dichotomy between the market segments that we serve. There's the 50-person A round funded company with a data team of 1 or 2 people, and we like absolutely tremendously care about having a product that those folks can use to productionize their DBT without needing to break the bank. But large enterprises really do have real needs that they're really willing to pay for, and that may be a part of the market that whoever asked this question might have a little bit less visibility into. But I feel pretty good that there is a market out there and there's a lot of demand for it.
I always think about the president of the United States has this executive privilege to share any top secret information, make it public. It's just like, Tristan, you're gonna have to keep playing that role here throughout the AMA. I think that's great context. I can, from the product perspective, tell you that we talk about this as a barbell strategy, where there's an open source, of course, distribution of DBT. Even in DBT Cloud, it's free, or it starts at $50 if you've got 2 users, $50 per user. And then way on the other end, there's these much larger enterprise clients that have higher contract values, and it's very security and compliance and like organizationally focused. The thing I just want to share is that it presents a real challenge for our product and engineering team and design to make sure that we're addressing the different types of needs from the different types of customers. So I actually think it ends up being a really healthy tension. But I can tell you in the back of my mind, sometimes I wish we could focus a little bit more and say we're only going to care about self-service for 2 quarters. We're only going to care about enterprise. But the reality is we need to be able to do both. I think so far it's going well. And it is funny that there isn't so much in the middle. It really is pretty polar in practice. But we are not suffering from lack of demand, I guess, to answer the question today.
Can I drill down a little bit into what you said, Drew? Joel has another question related to our focus on core versus cloud. Does this funding round change that focus? Will core users see an increased pace of development as well, or is the main focus going to be shoring up cloud features and enterprise in particular?
Yeah, so we're gonna take the ref function. We're gonna make it enterprise only. I'm just kidding. No, it'd be funny though if we did maybe April Fools or something. Please upgrade. That's not funny. So much of my thinking and really our thinking in the company is animated by a lot of the licensing and distribution events that happened, I don't know, like a year, 18 months, 24 months ago, around just say Mongo and Elastic. And a lot of that was in response to Amazon or similar cloud providers. And we could spend half an hour talking about just that. But at a high level, I think the thing I want to communicate is that we're thinking about our open source strategy as a part of a broader product strategy and not like a legal conversation. So we think really hard about what's open source and what's proprietary. And this decision criteria helps us ensure that DBT Core is like a complete SQL compilation and execution environment that kind of does all the mechanical things that you need to do to build data models in your warehouse and test them and so on and so forth. I can tell you that a big part of that decision criteria is that user experience, state management, identity and access controls, things like that, fall in the DBT Cloud proprietary. And so that's the strategy that we're working with. And over time, you should assume that if something is core to how DBT compiles or executes SQL, it will be, a part of DBT Core and open source. And if it's focused on user experience or identity and access controls and so on and so forth, it'll find its way into DBT Cloud.
That's awesome. Pivoting back to something a little bit more general.
At some point, can we talk about GUIs? There's a couple questions about GUIs.
We should. People should submit some questions about GUIs. We've got a question from Stan that's been upvoted quite a bit. They'd love to see data lineage at a column level upstream and downstream. Is that something being actively worked on?
This is like Drew's white whale. This is when Drew takes a week off. What he actually does is close all the blinds and work on column level lineage. I wish I were more kidding. Drew, do you want to say like why this problem is so hard and like why we're really like very interested in it, but also like respectful of the white whale.
Yeah, I think that's really good framing for this kind of problem. I think column level lineage is fascinating because it sits at the intersection of being like a really deep and challenging technical problem with myriad use cases that kind of cross-cut self-service or enterprise use cases. And so it's just this perfect storm of technically challenging and very interesting with a ton of utility and like lots of ways to extend it and apply it to solving different types of problems.
But why is it so hard?
Why is it so hard? Okay, so there's a few reasons. To do column level lineage well, like the really good version of this, you need to be able to parse and analyze SQL queries. And so even if you just start with select statements, you really do need to be able to understand in a select statement all the columns that are expressed from that query, trace them back to the columns that they come from. Okay, let's actually say that. You need to be able to understand the expressions that are encoded in a SQL query, the tables where they come from, and their provenance back through a series of other transformations back to source data. So you need to build like a validating SQL parser analyzer, and that requires you to write a grammar for a database. And so we talk about SQL as though it's a single thing, but in practice, the flavors of SQL across even the big databases, Snowflake, BigQuery, Redshift, throw Postgres into the mix, they're all going to have a lot of variance in terms of the query patterns that are exposed for the different functions that exist. In some cases, it's date add versus add date or column argument ordering. In other cases, there's entire sets of syntax like lateral flattening or unnesting, and BigQuery can have subcolumns. And so the variance across databases is very large. And in some cases, you can actually get a grammar from the database. So you can get BigQuery SQL grammar, which is cool. But as far as I know, you can't really get Redshifts or Snowflake SQL grammar. And in Snowflake's case, like it actually changes pretty often as they roll out new capabilities. So it's a moving target at the same time.
And I'm not in any way speaking with any knowledge of this, but the sense I've always had from database providers is that they enjoy this degree of freedom to like change the rules and not necessarily have to be held to a standards-based process or something like that. So it's very hard to get your hands around that like one-to-end problem.
So I've got a question for you, Tristan, on this topic. We're just talking about how much of a white whale this problem is, but Stuart wants to know if you ever get pressure to complement pure SQL writing with SQL generation via a GUI. And we just talked about what parts of what make that a difficult problem. So maybe if you do, what do you say to them?
Yeah, it's a great pivot. If you start by saying the right way to solve data transformation is just to write SQL with markup inside of it, then the tool that you build either needs to understand SQL or it doesn't really understand what's going on inside of the transformations. Like dbt understands your DAG, but dbt does not actually, inside the context of a model, does not really understand how the data flows. It's just treating your SQL as text in the same way that like a browser treats HTML as text. But if you build a GUI-based tool where let's say that you want to do a group by and you like go over to the left-hand side of the screen and you drag a box on that says like group by, and then you like connect a line. And that is the historical model in which these things have worked. And then the tool has all this metadata that it understands the data flows. And so you don't actually have to parse all the ASTs of every single database SQL dialect out there to solve this. The problem then is that typically the outputs of those types of products are not really human readable. They don't submit to version control or pull requests. They just don't work with DevOps. And that's it's really like the primary reason why we always believe that code is the right answer here. There's really two things. Like one, like arbitrary levels of abstraction that language gives you. And then two, like the submission to the DevOps best practices. I don't believe, Drew, we haven't talked about this in a while. I'm interested to see if like you have strongly held opinions here. I am not of the opinion that it is like inherently bad for users to use GUI-based tools. I don't believe that is the future of the way that this stuff will or should work, but at the same time, different people have different preferences, and I think it's appropriate to build bridges to where people are. I don't know that we ourselves would build such a thing, though. It might be the kind of thing where we would love to see other people in the space innovate on those type of interfaces.
Yeah, I'm super with you. I think that it becomes really challenging to express the like depth of capabilities of SQL in a UI, right? Like you're at some point can be limited by the forms that you can present. And I do think that there's a super reasonable like product that could be built there that will generate SQL queries. And maybe one such product already exists, and the trick is to like teach it about Jinja. But
I mean, Sigma Computing does a little bit of this, but they have a just slightly different take on what they're trying to do. But I think it's like clear that you could make a good interface that like the output of this would be SQL.
Yeah, I really agree with your assertion that analytics asset is in fact code, and you should treat it like code. And I would worry a little bit about having human beings writing and reading and pull request reviewing that code while also having a UI that generates it. And this sort of bi-directional sync between the two would feel really challenging, but certainly within the realm of possibility and something I'd be excited to see someone build if they're interested in it.
Dovetailing on this a little bit, we've been talking about the code layer a fair bit, but there's also a lot of innovation happening in the metadata space. Amundsen, Data Hub, etc. are great examples. And Nihil wants to know, how do you see DBT docs fitting in there?
It's a great question. This data cataloging, data discovery space is really fascinating to me. There are a lot of tools that are springing up that are all pointing at kind of the same problem. And we very much have one of those too. I can tell you that we're very much approaching this problem from the position of understanding that the metadata that DBT produces is really a core input to any sort of data discovery or data catalog tool. And it's why I've worked really hard to stand up this sort of metadata API, where the goal is very much to integrate with other tools and say, here's the information about your data warehouse. These are the tables that were built. Here's when they last ran. Here's if the tests are passing or failing, etc. How does the actual doc site fit into it, like into this mix of different products? Well, I'd really like it to be a consumer of this kind of metadata API. There's a lot of challenges with the way that we build and deploy the DBT docs website today. And they all come down to the fact that it's a static website, there's no API, and the entire contents of your database and DBT project need to be pulled into your browser to view any model. So I'd be excited for the DBT docs website to evolve into more of a natural product. And I think the way that we're going to do that is by leveraging the metadata API that we've talked about at like staging and coalesce a couple times over. And additionally, really focusing on this user experience in the same way that like Amundsen and company are doing. It's like you're building for a different type of consumer than an analytics engineer. It's going to be someone who's a little bit farther away from the DBT models. So this is just to say, I'd be excited to integrate with really all these tools, and we're having interesting conversations about that today. I also think that Docs is going to be formed into its own first-class product in the way that it's a little bit fledgling still today.
Fledgling in that you built it in 2 weeks and it hasn't changed much since then.
I think that's right. Yeah.
Is that what you mean? Yeah.
It's this real challenge in scaling. I can just say in that a couple of years ago, a great use of my time was taking 2 weeks and building the DBT docs website. But anymore, it's okay, if we want to do this and make it a real product, it's like you need a team of people focused on it. And I'm not good at writing JavaScript, so it's not easy to find people to bolt on new features on the website. It's really worth revisiting from first principles, I think, in a lot of ways.
I'm going to take one more question on the ecosystem and stack, and then maybe move in a little bit back to strategy. Is there any plan to look into the parity of different databases and make DBT more universal? At the moment, it seems that it works best on Snowflake, and the further you go from that, the less things work. And that's even more of the case with things like DBT utils and other packages.
That's interesting. So what, Drew, go through what are the first class supported packages or adapters that we support today?
Yeah, so BigQuery, Redshift, Snowflake, and Postgres to some extent are first class baked into DBT. We also have Presto and Spark that are more on the community supported tier. And then there's a lot of other definitely community supported plugins beyond that.
I'm, as a longtime user of all 4 of those major adapters, it is surprising to me to hear that there's a perception that there's like extremely different levels of support for those. Maybe really the question, the key of the question was in the end there in the packages. I know that it's a little hard to speak to DBT utils in too much detail because a lot of that is pretty community driven, but I have always tried when committing stuff there to make it cross database and like really test it on all of the databases, but that's not always such an easy thing to do. I don't know. I'm curious did you have the same reaction?
I would take maybe a little bit of a different, DBT might work best on Snowflake because Snowflake's really good at powering the kinds of use cases that DBT drives.
It's not like a just syntax. Yeah.
It actually, this is one of the really big challenges in building DBT core is the lack of parity and capabilities across the different data warehouses. So when we talk about a table materialization, that's not actually one thing, it's 3 different things. What I will say is a lot of the other databases are actually really innovating in terms of their SQL syntax and supported operations. So like for a long time, BigQuery didn't expose a lot of like DDL or DML operations via SQL. And it made it really a bear for us to implement the DBT flow on BigQuery in a great way, like gnarly edge cases, failure modes. But a lot of that's changing. And I will say,
they've been moving pretty aggressively on that.
Yeah, very much. I'm thrilled about the sort of next, can I say next generation? I don't know, of kind of data warehouses or that are relevant in the space, just in terms of how the DBT plugins are being built and our ability to say, hey, if you have these capabilities, DBT is going to really shine. And being able to make sure that the database itself supports the kinds of operations that you need if you're implementing the ELT flow, whether that's with DBT or something else. Like being able to rename tables is really critical, for example.
Yeah, renaming tables is really important. I think what Drew's referring to is that we're starting to see database vendors starting to either express interest in or actually beginning to take ownership of the DBT adapters for their database. And obviously, if you make the database, you're going to be in a pretty good position to know how you want a table to be created or how you want new data upserted into that table. So it's like a very positive transition from my perspective.
Can we talk about warehouses for just a bit? Carolus has a really great question and would like to see a discussion from you both around traditional data warehouses and design versus analytics engineering. They say they've had clients who try to shoehorn their visions of a completely keyed warehouse with updates, deletes, etc. into DBT. This often doesn't really fit the spirit and purpose of DBT, in their opinion. Where's the intersection?
Who's taking it? I can talk about it if you want.
Okay, it's all before my time. Like I've never done this on.
It's not even Vertica. Anyway. I think that we in our enterprise clients, we find ourselves working with this more and more because if you're starting a data team from scratch and you're just like, hey, we've got a brand new Snowflake account and so we're going to start from scratch, you're like, it's best practices and you find the DBT community and you learn things and you do it that way. If you work at a very large company that has had SQL-based data transformations inside of a data warehouse for 2 decades, it doesn't really matter what you think of the way that DBT recommends that you do it. Like you have this asset that you cannot just drop on the ground. Like it's not feasible. And so what we find ourselves going through is figuring out how to support workloads that exist inside of DBT and then creating migration plans where you can slowly migrate things to the analytics engineering point of view. And the nice thing in the DBT DAG is that everything is just tables of views and they can all select from each other. And it doesn't really matter if like you built this one 20 years ago and like you really should never write the code that way anymore. And this one is like super clean and best practice, like they can still interface with each other. And so I don't think that there are a lot of folks that we have spoken to that are like, no, your recommendations are terrible. They're like, we like legitimately help us figure out how to get there.
Anything to add, Drew?
I'm just smiling because I have had many conversations about like surrogate keys and MD5 in columns. And sometimes the answer is like,
get very opinionated about that.
Yeah, it's like, no, your recommendation is terrible. But it does become a question of like trade-offs and what are you optimizing for? That's real.
Fair enough. So we got about 10 minutes left on the clock, and we're probably not going to have time to get through all of the questions, but I'm going to pick out a few that have come in more recently and then start counting us down to wrap up. JJ has a question that I really love about being more vendor agnostic with BI visualization providers. They want to know if DBT will ever provide a visualization framework on top of exposures. So you could basically plop any visualization tool on top. You declare not just the SQL, but also user filters, things like that.
Okay, so I'll preface this with, we did just raise $150 million, but don't think we're going to build a BI tool until after the Series D. I don't know. I guess more jokes. Like, I really think about building a BI tool as like marching on Moscow in the winter. Just don't. It's a whole, it seems easy. It seems like charts, but it's not just charts. There's so much more than that.
There are smart people attacking this problem today. I'm not going to name names here because I'm sure that I'll miss people, but I am very excited about the movement in this space. And it's one of the wonderful things about being open is that like we don't have to build it. But I think that it like this should exist. Drew's response is based in scar tissue from our last company. RJ Metrics was a BI tool, and it was in the era of BI tools where because the cloud data warehouse had not yet come into existence, the modern data stack had not yet come into existence, it tried to do everything. And because of that, it wasn't able to, we were never able to do any particular part of the process well enough. And we always just felt behind and bailing out a boat. And so Drew and I have been joking for any time either of us says, let's build a BI tool. That's like our way of saying, let's take a loaded gun and point it straight at our feet.
So I will say, I think that DBT is really well positioned to encode like semantic information about your data models. And I think that's a pretty interesting thing worth exploring further. And Tristan, to your point about openness, I would be thrilled if that's like a thing that a lot of different tools want to consume. That feels great.
Yeah, it certainly feels like a question about standardization in some manner, because it sounds like there's a lot of opportunity for that right now. There's a related question from Josh on this topic. But given how popular DBT is becoming and how it seems database vendors are paying more attention to it, have you seen evolution of new features, changes that could be attributed back to the growth of DBT and the philosophy that it endorses?
I wonder if you have a different, you're smiling. Yeah. I don't think they would tell us. If anybody, yeah, they wouldn't tell us. We have a funny relationship with the database providers right now, which again, we like literally love all of them, but they look at us like, what are you guys going to do next? It's an interesting relationship.
This is a conspiracy theory. Let me start by saying that, but I choose to believe that Snowflake is billing on their cloud services layer because of how DBT used the information schema inefficiently. That's my conspiracy. And I would love it if someone from Snowflake could confirm or deny that for us. It's a good change. We ended up changing how we run the queries, yeah.
I think we are oftentimes the biggest user of information schema across any of the providers. Like we use that a lot.
Yeah. So we're making changes to use it less, which is good for probably the database provider, and it's faster if we don't use it so much.
Another great spicy take from Jacob. How do you plan to sell DBT to traditionalists who prefer UI tools like Power Designer and Warescape?
Yeah, the funny thing is, I don't know that Drew or I are the right people to answer that question. Like, I've never used Warescape in my life. I'm like broadly familiar that it is a tool in the space and that we run into it from time to time in large enterprises. But we hired a team of like incredibly experienced, both like account execs and solutions architects to actually like help folks navigate those conversations. I will say that there's like really a lot of awareness of DBT inside of large enterprises these days. They don't get in touch with us to fight with us. They like get in touch with us because they're like, there are things about what you're saying that really resonate with me. And so it's more about legitimately trying to evaluate whether a transition is appropriate. And it won't always be, but often it is.
I have nothing to add on the topic. I played RuneScape as a kid. I've never used Wearscape. If there's anything, it's really just that DBT isn't considered as a tool in isolation. It has a lot to do with how data gets into the data warehouse and what data warehouse you're using in the first place. And as a part of this broader wave towards cloud things instead of on-prem things, I think it's a really natural opportunity for folks to revisit the tools they're using and the processes they're employing and who's doing them and make changes all at once.
Yeah.
Word. So we got less than 5 minutes left on the clock. I'd like to take some of the questions that folks have asked about the company and the journey to get here and coalesce them into one final question. See what I did there? So can you tell us about some of the lessons you've learned along the way? What's the most important thing you've learned in building DBT Labs as a company? Are there any decisions you would have made differently in hindsight? And that could be about product, it could be about the company, it could be about the community.
I think, Drew, this is like a thing that reflects how little time Drew and I have been able to spend together in person in the past year and a half. But I think about this a lot recently, because you go through like big events and you try to think about what's gone well, what's gone poorly, that kind of stuff. And I really feel if a founder calls me up and says, hey, what's your advice for me? I'm not going to say, hey, maybe you should start a solo practitioner consulting shop, begin doing some work with a few clients, and then maybe the tool that you use to do that work that was open sourced will turn into a big deal. And riding the wave of a major industry transition. That's like not good advice. And so I don't know how much any of this isn't what we set out to do. I don't know that the three of us could do it again from scratch. If you put us in that position, maybe we could, I don't know. And so I think back a lot to a blog post that I sent Drew a couple of years ago that it was, I'm gonna have to find it and link it here, but it was Ribbon Farm. It was keep putting one bloody foot in front of another.
Yeah.
And I think that it's like a tried and true entrepreneurship thing, but like just wake up every day and take another step. And it's been 5 years of that.
I think that's real. I think about that blog post a lot. I will just say very quickly, I think doing the work was so critical. The fact that Tristan and I have things to say about data warehouses and what's good or bad about them, or SQL syntax and the industry at large, it's tough to read about that. The opportunity to really do it on a deadline for clients was such a crash course in everything analytics. And I think we as an organization learned a ton and developed really good opinions in the process. I think the other two things are related, which is
Drew almost quit after he missed his first client deadline. He hated the client work so much at the beginning.
It was tough for me. Glad you wrote me back in, Tristan. I honestly, people and relationships and community are so key. Like, I think about the DBT weekly active projects chart growing 10% every month for the past 5 years. And I think about the very early days with Duncan and Michelle and Scott B at Casper and how they just pollinated DBT across the New York City data scene, and how things like got away from us from there, so to speak. It's like those relationships are great. They've lasted for years. There's a lot of folks I need to reconnect with that I haven't talked to in a little bit. But I try to be mindful of that. It's for the people I'm meeting today that are going to be a part of our story for years and years in the future. That's absolutely worth investing in.
Yeah. And we have to go. I know, Anna, you're going to say that. But speaking of that, I have been looking for ways for a long time to keep making exactly those types of relationships, but do it at increasing scale. Like, I'm so appreciative for all the people that reached out to me after the Slack message and the email that I sent. I really appreciated that. But this feels like a fun way to do that too. If folks enjoyed this forum, like we don't have to raise another round of funding to do another one of these. I'd be happy to do this anytime.
I love that you say that, because I was going to put you both on the spot and ask you to take a look at the AMA channel after this for any questions we hadn't gotten to, and see if you can weigh in. And you're right, we are at time. So I want to say thank you here to all of the folks who asked questions in Slack ahead of time and also anonymously before this. Thanks, Tristan. Thanks, Drew. Remember that we've been seeding a lot of subliminal messaging, as someone pointed out in Slack about Coalesce. That is happening virtually this year, and you should sign up for it because it's going to be amazing.